Hi, Jordan. Good to see you. How are you going today? That's good to hear. Um, so my name's Felicity. I'm going to be your assessor for the unit of competency we're going to work on, which is called Use Oral Communication Skills for Effective Workplace Communication. So that's a lot of words. Um, Basically, we're just going to have a look at the skills that you can use to communicate things you already know and do regularly in the workplace. So I've got a few pieces of documentation here, and then we're going to record this so you can go back to it in the future if you need reminding on any of the parts. And you can always contact me if you need some help or advice on how to progress with the unit. So to start with, I'll just draw your attention to, we're just using version 1.1 of this assessment, and the unit number's FSKOCM05. Now there's three different assessment parts to be accredited in this unit of competency, and the three tasks are, first off, a presentation plan. Secondly, it'll be your actual presentation, and then at the end, after you've done your presentation, we'll get together or we'll have a phone call or a Skype session, and I'll ask you some questions about your presentation and how you can improve for the future and what went well, things like that. So we'll get started. At any time, if you have any questions or need me to go over anything, just let me know. Okay, so the first part of the assessment for this unit is your presentation plan. And what I've done is provided you with a modified plan with some empty gaps that you can scribble on while we're talking. Write down any ideas that you have. This one's version 1 of that plan. So it basically just breaks into the different parts, what's expected of you when you're preparing a presentation plan. So I'm just going to read off from the list of what I'm going to mark you on when we have a look at this assessment plan when it's done. So the instructions to you will be that I will provide you with any verbal instruction, and clarification on how to complete this task whenever you need it. If you're unsure of anything, just contact me. So first off, we're going to prepare a plan for a presentation that you're going to conduct in your own workplace. So the presentation can be anything related to your work role. So good places to start are things that you do every day, maybe something that you've been told by other people you work with that you're really good at, just so you're familiar with how to do it. But you also need to keep in mind that I'm not assessing you on what you're presenting. So if you, for example, gave a presentation on how to change a tyre, I'm not assessing you on your knowledge about how to change a tyre, because I don't know how to change a tyre. I'm assessing you on how to use oral communication skills to give presentations in your workplace. So it always comes back to that. I'm assessing you on your presentation, not the subject that you're choosing to talk about. So in your plan, and you'll see that on the copy I've given you, the blank one, you can write down some ideas. Your plan should contain a basic information section about the audience, so the type of people you're going to be presenting to. A presentation of your purpose. So why are you making the presentation? What information do you want to convey? Then we'll look at the resources that you're going to need in order to make your presentation, and identifying some objectives. So step by step, each point that you want to put across to the participants or your audience. in your presentation. We're going to look at making sure there's a logical structure with the content that's broken into segments. So that draft plan will help you break that down to meet that criteria. And we're going to talk about getting a realistic timing for each of those segments in your presentation. So you know overall to tell the participants, your boss, me, how long the presentation is going to take. So then we'll break that down into smaller components. Now, again, at any stage we can go back and rehash anything you need to go over, but this is just a summary of each component of the presentation plan that I'm going to be assessing you on. So the first thing is to identify your audience and the purpose of your presentation. So you just need to include basic information about the audience. So, you know, I have colleagues from my workplace here at the mechanic shop. Your presentation purpose, so you want to provide and use oral communication skills for effective workplace presentations, and you might use changing attire as an example of what you're going to talk about in your presentation. Then, using your plan, you're going to organise the content and the support material. So this is going to help you plan and get down in your head what you're going to talk about. So you can give a natural presentation, you're not constantly referring to notes, and if you get lost along the way, you can always go back to your plan to work out where you are and start again. So to organise the content and support material, we're going to plan the resources we'll need for our presentation. The objectives are included. The presentation plan is structured logically, content is broken into segments, and the timing is included for each segment of the presentation. And that's one component we can check off, and you'll be marked as satisfactory or not yet competent. And that's the first part of your assessment. So when we work through that and we get your assessment plan down pat and you're ready and confident in your presentation material, you can let me know and we'll arrange and plan for a time where you can actually make the presentation to your colleagues. The instructions for this assessment are that I'll provide you with any additional verbal instruction and clarification on how to complete this course wherever you need it. And if you're unsure of anything, you can always check back in with me. And then we're going to agree on a mutually convenient time to conduct your oral-based presentation. We're going to use the plan that you've used in the previous assessment to do that. In your presentation, you should be prepared and organised in terms of your content and materials. So you know the order of what you're going to talk about. If you're using, for example, tools that you might use when you're changing attire, if you're going to show the audience that or how they work, or diagrams, or even videos that might show you changing attire. You need to know what order they're going to come in, so prepared. I'm going to be looking at you to use a sort of steady, easy to follow pace. No, it's really difficult when you're making presentations. Are you confident with public speaking? Yeah. So you really need to pay attention to how you're talking, slow your breathing down and slow your pace down to make sure that everyone can understand and follow where you're at in your presentation. Another thing to consider is varying the tone of your voice. So, for example, you know, if the group was suddenly being really loud or you were having difficulty controlling the group, you could try a couple of different strategies, like you could talk really quietly and use gestures to show that you're still continuing. That might be a way of making people stop and strain to hear what you're trying to say. Or you could use a big, loud action with a good grand gesture to say, okay, let's get this back on track. And use a nice loud voice with a tone saying, okay, let's get back on track. We need to hear your voice, so you need to be able to project your voice clearly across the room that you're presenting to, so everyone in the room can hear. We want you to use terminology that's relevant to your workplace, so everyone that's present knows what you're talking about. If you name a certain tool or a process that you use in the workshop, participants need to know what that terminology is. We need to work on delivering clear and concise information. So thinking about if there's a complex step in a process, thinking about the different ways we can explain it that can not make it so wordy or bulky. So instead of reading like a whole checklist or a procedure, we can narrow it down to specific terms or steps. Now you might have noticed my pronunciation and me using utterances like and It's really hard when you're making a presentation and speaking publicly to minimize these, to try and stop yourself from doing it. But it's good to just be aware of how using good pronunciation and minimizing saying things like and and alright can help. There, I did it. Can help how you're delivering your message using your oral communication. Did it again. It's good to use open and non-threatening hand gestures. So open hand gestures, for example, palms up, gesturing something you're talking about if you're using an example or a diagram or a video, might be a non-threatening body gesture, whereas being more aggressive might include being really close to your participants and maybe gesturing with your hands towards their face or anything like that. Give them space. Be approachable so people want to engage in your content, particularly if you're asking questions and getting feedback from the group. You want to come across as non-threatening, and I'm sure you are. And with your body language, even though you may be really nervous in your presentation, use a good steady stance. Use body language that shows you know what you're talking about and you're enthusiastic or you care about what you're delivering, and that's going to help you engage your learners and your participants in the session. Following the presentation, we're going to collect some feedback forms from your audience, and I've provided an example here of a feedback form for you. Just see if I can grab that. So that just are some basic questions that you can go through and review to see what the group responded to, what you did well, were there any areas that you needed to work on a bit to improve on for the next time you make a presentation. And that will relate to the third part of our assessment that we're coming up to next. So when you're making your presentation, it's important to use the appropriate grammar, vocabulary and pronunciation. Now, there's nothing wrong with using common terms that you would use in the workshop, but they have to be professional. They have to be accurate and appropriate, so you're calling the tool by the correct name, and the entire audience knows what you're talking about when you're using that particular term. Your language and style is consistent with what's used in your workplace. So you're at the same pace, you're not over talking to your audience. So another part of you making a presentation to look at is using appropriate grammar, vocabulary and pronunciation. So we'll be looking at how you use terminology that's relevant to your workplace and that it's accurate and appropriate. So you're using words that your participants are familiar with. We're going to look at the language and style that you use is consistent with what your participants understand from working in your workplace. Your pronunciation will be clear and understandable. It's okay to make mistakes, and it's okay to make utterances like and but be conscious of it and try and minimize it where you can, just to give you a more polished and reliable presentation. You'll also be required to consider some non-verbal communication to enhance your presentation. So these might include things like hand and body gestures. Again, that they're open and non-threatening, that your body language conveys confidence and enthusiasm as appropriate to the topic. And you need to use at least one visual communication method to engage your participants. So this could be using diagrams, it could be using a video, for example, of you in the workshop changing attire. It could be actually bringing in the tools and demonstrating how they use during changing attire. But you need at least one visual aid to help your verbal communication. And finally, you're going to seek feedback on whether a presentation was the appropriate for the audience and its content. So you're going to use a feedback form. I'll just give you an example of this one here. So it just goes through and allows the participants to have a think about the presentation and score you based on how they think you went. There's some areas there to talk about what they really enjoyed in the session and what you could do, any suggestions for the future to make your presentation a bit better. That will help us when we move on to the final part of the assessment, which is we're going to have a questioning session where I'm going to ask you some basic questions, getting you to think about the presentation, verbal communication techniques, some non-verbal techniques, and why using good grammar and vocabulary with your pronunciation is important during a workplace presentation. So you'll get feedback based on your participation feedback forms, and I'll also provide you with a feedback form based on how you've met the criteria for this assessment that you can use to reflect. So during this assessment, I'm going to ask you some questions, and we can probably just do it talking, like an interview style. We don't have to do it with like a formal test where the questions are written and you have to write the answers. What do you think? Would that work for you? Yeah, I think that would be easier. So the areas that the questions are going to look at are going to ask you to evaluate your own performance and identify areas for improvement, that you have some knowledge, evidence of oral communication strategies to use when you deliver workplace presentations, that you're aware of non-verbal communication to enhance the delivery of workplace presentations, and that explain why it's a good idea to use good grammar, vocabulary and pronunciation when you're giving workplace presentations. So it might be a bit different if you were presenting to a peer group or talking about something just casually in the workshop. But when you're giving a workplace presentation, why it is good to use good grammar and vocabulary and pronunciation, so your listeners and your audience can have confidence in what you're saying is professional and correct. So that are the requirements of being assessed for using oral communication skills for effective workplace presentations. Like I said, you can always contact me as you work through. We can make time to go through your presentation plan. And if there's any questions, seeking advice on who to contact for maybe the best information to use, you can always talk to me. Always good to have a chat to your inline manager, particularly about resources like procedure, protocols, things like workplace checklists, any work health and safety requirements that you might have that relate to your presentation. They're always good things to include. Like I said, I'm here anytime if you need help. Okay.